Now, Pervez Musharraf isn't the only controversial figure at the Hay Festival this year. I'm sure Christopher Hitchens would bridle at being compared to the former Pakistani leader, but they do share an ability to divide opinion. Christopher's here this year to launch his memoir, Hitch 22. It's a memoir of confessions and contradictions. I'm David Shariat-Madari from Comment is Free, and I'm here in the Guardian's luxury shed to talk to Christopher Hitchens. Now, Christopher, in some ways, Pervez Musharraf embodies the kind of illegitimate ruler you've spent your life railing against. But he was, of course, seen as a valuable ally of the US after 9/11. Was support for his regime a price worth paying, do you think?
Talibanization is another name for the colonization of Afghanistan by Pakistan. The best thing that President Bush did, one of the many good things he did in response to September 11, 2001, was to shift American policy away from its Cold War base of hostility to India and towards a more open engagement with it. I still think any policy in the region not based on friendship with India, a huge secular, multi-ethnic, English-speaking democracy, is doomed to fail.
Okay, let's turn to your memoir. Now, there's a clear sense of a young man developing, a sense of destiny almost that runs through the book. But of course, life isn't always neat and tidy like that. So I wanted to know, in the process of writing it, how much did you polish, gloss over, or improve for public consumption?
Well, I left a lot out, would be the first thing I would want to say. I mean, there were things that I realized that just wouldn't have room for. As it was, I wrote more than twice as much as the publisher had asked for. And with life writing, there is the problem that whereas one usually practices economy, in writing a memoir, your memory actually improves. It would be for someone else who knew me, I think, at the time, or had known me, to say whether I'd polished, euphemized, gilded the lily in any way.
I think a lot of people will be quite shocked to read about your mother's suicide and the circumstances of it. So is it something you've made a decision not to talk about very much up until now?
Very much so. I mean, for a long time I suspected myself, even if I told a close friend about it, because I was afraid of looking as if I was in search of sympathy. But I remember thinking that I would one day have to write about it. And so when I was asked to consider writing a memoir, I first thought that if I can write the chapter about Yvonne, my mother, in such a way that it is, I hope, moving, but without being sentimental, then I think I could probably do the rest. So I wrote it all in one go. I wrote it in one evening, having thought about it for quite a while. And then I cried, more than I thought I would, but I didn't think it would make anyone else cry. I didn't want it to have that effect. I sent it to my publisher and my agent, and I said, if this works, then I think I can do it, and if you don't like it, we'll drop the whole subject.
One thing that struck me about the scene where you go to Athens and you see the room where your mother died is that you move quite seamlessly to a consideration of the political scene, because obviously Athens is kind of in tumult at the time. And I wondered if there was a sense in which you were taking refuge slightly in the political side of things, and whether that's something that you've seen as a pattern in your life, because obviously you're a very politically engaged person.
I wouldn't say I normally took refuge in politics. No, it's not much. People who are in search of refuge probably shouldn't go into politics, especially the politics of war and revolution that interest me the most. But I certainly took refuge in politics that week, I suppose you could say. I mean, if it had just been an average week in the winter in Athens, and I'd had to be dealing with the Greek bureaucracy and trying to find out that my mother hadn't in fact been murdered, but that had taken her own life with a lover in a suicide pact, that would have been a drama of a sort, but it would have been very bleak indeed. It was not made any less bleak by the fact that there was a revolution and a counter-revolution going on in the streets outside, that I was already friends with the Greek opposition to the dictatorship. I already knew something about it. I won't say it gave me something to do, but what it did mean was that the memory of that week can never leave me. It was too rich for my blood. That's why I think why it took me so long to try and write it down.
You use this interesting phrase quite a lot about keeping two sets of books, and I think that first comes up. Well, it first comes up at school in chapel, but also at Oxford, where you're Chris on the one hand and you're Christopher on the other, and Chris is the agitator, and Christopher is the person who goes for dinner with the Warden of All Souls. Mm-hmm. Do you still have a sense in your life now that you're keeping two sets of books? And is that magnified by being a public persona?
Yes, it is. Scott Fitzgerald says somewhere that the real sort of test of everybody is how they handle contradiction. Well, one way of handling contradiction is to admit it. In fact, that's step one. A lot of people try and act as if their beliefs, their behaviour, their allegiances and so on are, as it were, seamless. You won't in fact find this is true of anybody. So the question is really acknowledging to yourself that you want more than one kind of life and seeing if you can get it without being hypocritical or without the one betraying the other. So it's my account of trying to do that.
Now, in Saturday's Haycast, your brother Peter talked to Madeline Bunting about his book, The Rage Against God, and why atheism troubles him. Peter told Madeline that he would like to hear your response to his book.
I had hoped that someone would have the wit to ask him to review it, and then we might have seen his response. He said he would respond at the time, but he expected to be asked to review it. So he never has actually given me the response he promised.
So you're actually quite keen for that dialogue? Well,
as I say, as soon as he said, I expect to be asked to do this, I thought, yeah, well, quite, it would be a reasonable thing to do.
Right, do you want to know what I want to say? Well, it's very good indeed. I don't consider it to be a defence of religion, nor much of a critique of atheism, but it's a very good account of not just what Peter thinks, but of how.
Does it strike you as odd that you and your brother have become, this funny phrase, public intellectuals?
It is funny, isn't it?
Do you think you've spurred each other on?
I don't think so, no.
But you were the older brother,
yes.
So he would have seen you becoming a journalist, and perhaps that would have nudged him.
Yes, but if anyone was ever definitely born to be a journalist, it would be Peter.
Why do you say that?
Oh, well, you could tell from the first. He got a typewriter long before I did, for example, and sort of taught himself to type. And we used to sort of produce family newspapers a bit, but I think he was usually the editor.
And yet you've ended up on...
We are very different politically, but there is one thing above all that creates a distance between me and anybody else, and it's simply the belief in the supernatural. It could be a failure of imagination on my part. If it weren't there, there's no question I'd feel a sense of loss.
At the Guardian debate last night, the motion of which was, reason is always right, Ayaan Hirsi Ali was arguing for the motion, and she said, if I had a magic wand, I'd wave it, and everyone here would become rational humanists. But you're saying that would take a bit of the variety out of life, and
yes, and something
wouldn't be left with anyone to argue.
Something unquantifiable as well. Yes, it would.
Okay, so there are some redeeming aspects to religion after all.
Sure, I've been to Esfahan.
Christopher Hitchens, thanks very much for talking to us about your memoir.
It's a pleasure, thank you.